Over the past year, I've become more and more convinced that some of the most intriguing social interactions happen as a result of bad situations. For me, they've come in the form of the countless mechanical failures my bike and car provide me with. I was sat, driving my car on the way to the north for the weekend when my right brake cover decided to fall off. I'd been going about 50 and it hit a small bump going over a bridge. Now, for any other car, this would have been no issue at all. But for my beautiful 1982 Toyota Corolla, Stacy the Third, that was enough to dislodge the brake cover and somehow lock that brake completely. The car jerked to the right and I fought with it to bring it to a stop on the left side of the road. And there we were, in the middle of nowhere with a broken car holding up traffic. In that moment, I thought back to a beautiful saying my dad has, "Wenn's abfällt, brauchst es nicht." If it falls off, you didn't need it anyways. Unfortunately, that didn't apply to my brakes. And so we were stuck with no clue what to do or who to call, until we were hit with a stroke of luck. A guy called Pakmade. He'd been driving past with his kid when he saw the car and decided to see what was wrong. He inspected my car, told me he knew a guy, and drove off again. He came back 10 minutes later with two young mechanics, and what followed was a lovely 2 hours, which they started by mispositioning the jack and dropping Stacy. They quickly got her back up again and then proceeded to switch out both my brake pads. During this time, Pakmade and I got to talk. From his warring down the road to his kid that loves playing badminton and scheduling in a time for us to play. He'd proudly shown us photos of his beautiful wife and kids here in Bali. And then some photos of his other wife and kids in Java. I was like, all right, mate, we all get it. And so, from that originally rough situation, we'd met someone who'd taken the time out of their day to help complete strangers, and in the process, we'd gotten to know one another. Our interactions shape the way we perceive the world. From the moment we're born to this current moment, every interaction has had an impact on us and somehow shaped our existing reality. Whether it be while buying coffee, talking to friends, or during a meeting, human interaction is the essence of everything. Connection is a necessity for everyone, both physically and emotionally. As the first of the 6 pillars of brain health, human interaction activates parts of the brain in the frontal lobe that drastically slows cognitive aging. Even now, while I'm talking to you, our brains are synced. Your brain mimics the emotions I'm portraying and lights up in the exact same areas as mine. And so, humans are neurologically wired to connect with one another. We have an average of 27 conversations a day, each lasting around 10 minutes. That's over 4 hours every single day. But how many of those interactions are truly meaningful? We spend a lot of time going over the same topics, discussing the same aspects of our lives, without learning anything new about ourselves or the people we interact with. I found this extremely often myself, often falling into a default conversation that seemed to repeat itself every day. And as someone who thrives off of deeper connection with my friends and family, I wanted to try eradicate these numb interactions. It started at the beginning of 2022. Every day to get to school, I drive past a warung 50 meters from my house. I've been there hundreds of times before, buying coconuts and talking to Ibu Mama, the sweet lady that runs the place. Past the small talk, I got to learn about some of her day-to-day experiences, her family, and her dream of turning her warung into a proper restaurant. A couple weeks passed, and I started seeing an English guy sitting outside her warung every day drinking bintangs. Every time I drove by, there he was, sipping away. And slowly, I started noticing changes within the warung. A new paint job, a new fridge, and some Bob Marley photos. I stopped by one time and happened to meet him. I'd already built quite a stereotype for him in my head, as we often do, but I talked to him and realized that he is one of the kindest individuals. Despite the 30-year age gap, we shared similar interests and were able to connect. He told me about his life, his coming to Bali, how he was partially homeless at the moment, and how he'd felt drawn to help Ibu Mama reach her dream. He'd only been in Bali for 6 months, but had already left a significant impact on someone else's life. I left that interaction with a feeling I hadn't felt before. My mind went to the Humans of New York project by Brandon Stanton and a class we were doing at school inspired by that, Humans of Bali. I thought how cool it would be to take that a step further and create an ongoing blog here in Bali, sharing my interactions with a wider community. And so, combining my passions for photography and interaction, Orang Bali was born. I created a website and an Instagram account as platforms to share my interactions. I started within Greenstone, interviewing Ibu Harriet, Pak Alex, and Ibu Berlin. I learned about Ibu Harriet's time in Africa, how she'd gotten kicked out of a car in the middle of the Kenyan desert and came to the realization that she wanted to become a teacher. I learned about Pak Alex's fear of failure and Ibu Berlin's definition of love. Each of these interactions were incredible and only convinced me further that this was a project I wanted to pursue. I then moved on to the wider Bali community, meeting with Henzo, a German-Egyptian guy dedicated to improving the lives of others. He told me how he'd started his organization, Feed Ubud, at the beginning of 2020. Having only been here 3 months, he and a couple others created care packages to help struggling families throughout the pandemic. I was completely blown away by his energy, his happiness, and his love for life. He had a seemingly infinite amount of advice that I've since tried to incorporate into my life, this being a short quote. Question if what you're doing is fulfilling. If it is, keep doing it. I then connected with Ibu Kim from Bali Street Mums, where I met 16-year-old Nilu. This is her husband, also 16, and the father of their 2 children. They lived in a 3x3 meter room with a mattress, a stove, a kettle, and mats for the 2 other family members living with them. Just to put that in comparison, the average king-size bed is a little smaller than 2x2 meters. I learned about how they'd moved to Denpasar with the hopes of earning some money, but had struggled to find jobs in the area. They told me that they were now struggling to pay rent and were considering moving back to their village in the north. Talking with Nilu, only a year younger than me and my classmates at the time, she was already responsible for 2 humans, whereas I struggled to show up to school on time. This really made me realize how unaware we can be of one another and how easy it is to assume that our experience is universal. And so, one day, I was sitting in my room when I got a message from Tirta with an incredible idea. She proposed that we create an exhibition of stories and interactions with a focus on social issues as a collaboration between our Greenstones. We could bring light and awareness to stigmatized topics and raise funds to help those in need. I loved the idea, and so we got to work, brainstorming ideas for the name of the event, and we landed on Voices of Silence. We felt this perfectly encapsulated what we were trying to achieve. We then went about identifying individuals and topics we wanted to cover, quickly planning our first interview with Kai Mata. Just before, we'd met with Eden, a then new student who'd mentioned he loves photography, and so we invited him along, and that formed our trio. Life quickly became a blur of organizing interviews and completing them, each interaction as incredible as the last. We met with people from Yayasan Gaya Dewata, a trans community in Denpasar, people from PKP community, orphans living at Bali Street Mums, people from Yayasan Chaya Mutiara Ubud, Bim Bim from Movement of Recovery, and 5 other incredible individuals, each sharing with us their amazing stories to get to where they are today. And so, that brings me to my second mechanical failure. We've been driving along on the way to an interview in Seminyak on my beautiful Honda Cub. My favorite thing to drive until it breaks down or parts fall off. In this case, we've been driving along, had hit a bump yet again, and had gotten a flat tire. So we walked the bike to the nearest Benkel and went to go get a drink. It was really hot that day. As we walked into the cold oasis that is Alpha Mart, we were met by a sight we'd never seen before. 2 Indonesian nuns. Right when we saw them, we knew we had to talk to them. And so we waited outside nervously and asked them for an interview. They accepted, and for the next hour, we got to learn about their lives. From the kindergartners they taught, to their strict daily schedules, and how everything they did had to be reported back to the nunnery. If something didn't follow that schedule, it had to first be accepted before being allowed to do it. Though this strict lifestyle may not sound appealing to some of us, they shared that people don't understand. We chose this life. They ask, why do you live like this? It's because we are for God. We don't marry, we reduce communication, we are limited. And so, from that originally undesirable situation, we'd been practically gifted one of the most eye-opening interactions, learning about this completely different world Indonesian nuns live in. And so, after each interview, we came back, compiled the photos, selecting the best image, and transcribed the audio. We printed out all the photos, opting for 2 sizes, small and large. We built wooden frames for the small ones and had holes punched in the large ones so that we could hang them up. We then compiled all the interviews and uploaded them to my website, laser printing out a snippet of each one to have physically on the day for people to read. We had a beautiful bamboo trellis built as the entrance to the event, but this caused some issues. Mainly, it was massive. You'd have probably seen this bamboo archway sitting next to the sandcap for a couple months. That's because it was stuck. Every time we tried to move it, it would get caught on trees and branches, and we'd have to carry it back. Finally, the day before the event, I was fed up. I'd gotten a saw and was ready to chop off every branch on the way to the heart of school so that we could carry it through. But luckily, Tirta and Eden convinced me not to. I don't know how it got to the heart of school in the end. The carpenting team worked their magic, and it was in position that morning. And thankfully, all the trees still had their branches. And finally, the day had come. After weeks and weeks of planning and a couple frantic days beforehand, running around making sure everything was organized, it was unreal to see Voice of Silence come together. We'd completely transformed the heart of school into an exhibition. We'd set up the small photos on the ground floor, the large ones upstairs, had cloth hung up to enclose the area, and had a sound system connected throughout the heart of school. We'd invited all the interviewees to be there, and almost all of them made it. It felt really important to have all the people behind the photos with us in person, to bring a reality to the issues presented. This created a beautiful moment where people would be reading the stories, and suddenly the interviewee would pop up right next to them. And so, right until around halfway through the event, it still seems like quite a blur. We've been running around making sure everything was running smoothly, up until one moment where my mom came and found me and said, "You should hear the conversations going on everywhere." Everyone was discussing the individual stories and the issues brought forward, which was exactly what we'd set out to do. And so, we'd succeeded. From that moment on, we were able to relax, enjoying the evening and talking to everyone, answering any questions anyone had. We ended the night with a short thank you speech and with just under 70 million Indonesian rupiah in ticket sales and donations. We then, after the event, withdrew all the money and went around to each organization, donating the money between them. It was incredible to hear firsthand the impact we'd had and the connections we've been able to form. Starting this project, I don't think any of us could even imagine the amount of happiness we've been able to spread. And the main thing they told us was that they felt heard. Movement of Recovery even gave us the opportunity to open one of their sharing circles, where we were able to share our project with their wider community. Thank you. But in the end, I found that throughout this entire process of interacting with others, it's been the people closest to me that I've learned the most about. Towards the end of this year, I fell into quite an unproductive place. I stopped doing the things I loved, stopped working towards my project, and stopped doing the things to better myself. I'd lost the energy that I'd originally started the year with. And from that, it's been my parents that realized this and whipped me back into shape. They noticed the unhealthy trends that I'd fallen into and helped me overcome them. And from this, we were able to form a deeper bond. As children, we know our parents our entire lives, but they only know us for a fraction of theirs. My parents have always been extremely strong role models throughout my entire life, and I've always had an overall feeling of all is well. I wasn't exposed to the issues and struggles life was sending our way. But going on this journey and learning about these times in my parents' lives has been extremely impactful. I learned about the things going on behind the seemingly perfect faces, how there was a time when we nearly had to flee the country, and I had no idea. Before that, I could barely even imagine anything troubling my parents. But learning about their past, all the ups and downs, has formed a deeper bond I didn't know possible. I went from seeing them as the perfect portrayal of being to understanding that they too are human, with strengths and flaws, same as every one of us. And bringing this mentality to every interaction I engage in has completely changed the way I meet with people. It's improved my mindset towards others, straying from the unrealistic assumptions I used to create. Humans are social creatures. Have a look around the sandcap. Look at how many connections there are, how many could be formed, how much we assume, how much we don't know. What stops us from interacting with others? I've learned a lot over this past year, from how to navigate the incredible ups and the horrific lows of daily life, to the fact that every single person has a story. And being able to share that with others is the most beautiful thing in the world. Thank you.